Welcome to African Folktales by Mazi. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments section. Now, sit close to the fire, open your ears, and listen well. Because this is not just a story, it is a warning. Our elders say every true story begins before the first word is spoken. It begins in silence, where spirits listen and truth waits. In the center of our town stood Morning Star Assembly, firm like an ancient Iroko tree that had seen many seasons. Its bell was our drum. When it rang, traders closed their stalls, children stopped running, and even quarrels rested. We believed God's eyes rested there. I was raised inside that belief. My name is Kola, and from childhood I was taught that questioning a man who stood on the altar was the same as questioning heaven itself. The church leader spoke softly but firmly, his prayers long, his voice smooth like palm oil poured on yam. People trusted him because he sounded like peace. On the day the wind changed, the sun rose red and heavy. My grandmother clicked her tongue and said the ancestors were uneasy. That Sunday, the sermon was about truth. He spoke of lies as rot that eats the soul slowly. The people shouted amen, but I noticed his hands trembling against the pulpit. After service, he blessed the children. When his eyes met mine, his smile slipped for a breath, and I felt cold. That night, elders gathered behind closed doors. Lanterns burned late, and the offering box was removed from the open hall and locked away. My father stopped singing during prayer. When I asked why, he answered, "When a river changes its voice, even fish must be careful." I did not understand then. But the story had already begun. In small towns, secrets travel faster than harmattan wind. Soon, whispers followed us like shadows at sunset. At school, teachers spoke more about obedience than learning. Neighbors greeted us with smiles that did not reach their eyes. Morning Star Assembly still stood tall, but something inside it felt hollow. One evening, my mother sent me to return a Bible to the church office. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and dust. As I walked closer, angry voices broke the quiet. "You said this would never surface," the church leader snapped, his voice stripped of kindness. Another man replied calmly, "People fear God more than truth. Use that fear well." My heart beat like a talking drum. Through the half-open door, I saw papers spread across the list: names, numbers, offerings counted twice. "If this comes out, the church will collapse," the leader said. "Then preach louder," the other replied. "Call questions a sin." My foot scraped the floor. Silence fell. The door opened. He stared at me, eyes hard. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the Bible with shaking hands and said my mother sent me. He took it slowly and warned me never to listen where I did not belong. That night, sleep refused me. I finally understood the sermons. God's name was being worn like a mask to hide something rotten beneath. Sunday returned with a heavy sky. The church overflowed, but joy was thin and fragile. The sermon burned with fear instead of hope. He spoke of punishment, obedience, and danger in doubt. People cried openly. I watched my father closely. When the offering basket reached him, his hands stayed still. Two elders noticed and followed him outside after service. That night, whispers filled our home. Words cracked like dry wood, missing money, threats, scripture twisted to silence truth. My mother wept quietly, pressing her wrapper to her face. The next morning, my father sat before a closed Bible, his eyes tired but steady. "When truth is tied," he said, "lies dance freely, but dancing never lasts." Days later, my closest friend stopped coming to school. His house stood empty, door swinging in the wind. No farewell, no explanation. Soon after, an announcement spread across the town, a special cleansing service. Attendance was required. My grandmother shook her head slowly and said, "When a hunter beats the drum at night, blood soon answers." Fear grew in many hearts, but inside me, a quiet fire began to wake. I started seeing how faith was being used to blind eyes and closed mouths. The cleansing service began after sunset. Candles lined the walls, their shadows crawling like restless spirits. The air felt thick, heavy with waiting. The church leader raised his Bible high and declared there was sin among us: doubt, disobedience, poisoned tongues. Names were called, not crimes. Fear tightened around every heart. When my father's name echoed from the pulpit, the church fell silent. "Step forward," the command came. My father stood tall, his voice calm. "Truth does not fear light," he said. "Tell them where the money went." Gasps burst like firecrackers. The candles flickered wildly. Elders rushed forward in panic. "Sit down," the leader shouted. "No," my father replied. Hands grabbed him. He was dragged outside as prayers turned into screams. The bell did not ring that night. In our folk tales, when elders fail, children remember and carry the truth forward. I pressed my father's words deep into my heart, knowing the lie had finally shown its face. Morning arrived with locked doors. Morning Star Assembly stood silent, its bell quiet like a broken drum. The church leader vanished like smoke after fire. My father returned home bruised but breathing. He smiled with tired strength and said, "They hid behind God, but truth walks barefoot. It always arrives." The town argued for weeks. Some blamed doubt. Others blamed rebellion. Many chose silence because silence felt safer. Slowly, the church emptied. Ross pushed through its steps and Rust ate the bell. Today, elders warn children under moonlight that when God's name is used to hide a lie, faith bleeds and communities fall apart. This story did not end there. Like all true folktales, it was only beginning to walk. After Morning Star Assembly fell silent, the town did not sleep. People gathered in corners, speaking in half voices, watching who listened. Some said the church would reopen after prayers. Others said it was cursed. My father stayed indoors, healing slowly, while elders visited at night, coming and leaving like thieves of truth. They warned him to keep quiet. They said peace was more important than honesty. My father answered that peace built on lies is a grave waiting to open. Word spread, and fear followed. Children were told not to play near our house. Women crossed the road when my mother passed. Still, my father refused to bow. One afternoon, I followed him to the market. He spoke calmly to anyone who asked, telling the same story each time, never adding, never removing. The money was taken, he said. God's name was used to cover it. Some listened with wide eyes. Others shook their heads and walked away. That night, stones were thrown at our roof. No one was seen. My mother cried quietly, but my father held her and said storms always fight hardest before they end. I learned then that truth has a cost, and those who speak it must be ready to pay. A week later, the elders announced a meeting at the village square. They said it was to restore unity. People came cautiously, standing far apart. An elder spoke first, saying the church had suffered because of rebellion. Murmurs rose. My father stepped forward without fear. He reminded them of offerings counted twice, of doors locked, of questions punished. The crowd shifted uneasily. Then a woman spoke. She said her husband had been chased away for asking the same questions. Another man followed, then another. Stories poured out like water breaking a dam. The elders tried to quiet them, but the crowd no longer listened. Fear was losing its grip. Someone shouted that God's name had been dragged through mud. Silence fell. For the first time, the lie had nowhere to hide. That night, elders returned home without answers. I saw something new in the town, anger mixed with relief. Like a wound finally exposed to air. Days turned into weeks. Morning Star Assembly remained closed. Rain leaked through its roof. Weeds climbed its walls. The bell never rang. Some families left town. Others stayed and argued. A few gathered under trees to pray without leaders or walls. My father joined them. He said faith does not live in buildings. I watched as people prayed more softly but more honestly. One evening, a stranger arrived. He asked questions carefully, writing answers in a small book. He spoke to elders, traders, widows, even children. Fear returned briefly, but it could not settle. Too much had been said. When the stranger left, elders stopped visiting our house. Stones no longer hit our roof. Silence came again, but it felt different. It felt clean. Time passed. My father healed fully, but the marks stayed. He said scars are reminders, not shame. One morning, we walked past the old church. The doors were broken. Inside, dust covered the floor where people once cried and shouted amen. I felt sadness, but also clarity. My father said if truth had been spoken early, the building would still stand. Instead, lies were fed until they grew teeth and bit everything around them. That day, I promised myself never to use God's name to silence truth. I promised to listen when questions came. Years later, I tell this story by firelight. Elders nod as I speak. Children, listen closely. Morning Star Assembly is now only a memory, but the lesson lives. When faith is used to hide lies, it destroys itself. When truth is spoken, even late, it heals slowly. This is why elders say stories must be told again and again, so the drum will warn before the village falls silent. Elders say a village does not heal the day the wound is seen. Healing begins when the pain is accepted. After the stranger left town, life moved slowly, like a limping goat. Morning Star Assembly remained empty, but its shadow still covered us. People argued less, yet trust did not return easily. Every prayer sounded careful, as if words themselves could betray the speaker. My father became quieter, but his silence was not fear. It was listening. Each evening, people visited our home, not loudly, not together, but one by one. They came with questions they had buried for years. Some asked about money. Others asked why doubt was treated like poison. My father answered gently, never raising his voice. He reminded them that God does not fear questions, only lies fear light. I watched these visits closely. I noticed how people stood straighter after speaking, how their eyes cleared. That was when I learned truth does not shout, it frees. One night, my grandmother called me to her mat and told me stories of old priests who lost their way and villages that followed them into darkness. When a guide is blind, she said, the road becomes dangerous. Her words stayed with me. I began to understand that Morning Star Assembly did not fall because faith was weak. It fell because truth was chained for too long. The town was learning this lesson slowly, painfully, but honestly. The next planting season came with heavy rains. As crops grew, conversations grew too. At the market, people no longer whispered only blame. They spoke of responsibility. Some elders admitted their silence helped the lie grow. This admission shocked many. In our culture, elders rarely confess mistakes aloud. Yet once one spoke, others followed. They said fear made them choose comfort over truth. These confessions did not fix everything, but they cracked the wall of pride. One afternoon, a meeting was called, not by leaders, but by ordinary people. They gathered under the oldest tree in town. No pulpit, no titles, just voices. My father spoke last. He said faith should heal, not wound. He said God's name is not a shield for wrongdoing. When he finished, no one clapped. Instead, they nodded. That silence meant agreement. From that day, small prayer circles formed across the town. No single voice ruled them. People read, questioned, and listened together. Some still longed for the old church, for structure and certainty. Others found peace in shared responsibility. I saw that faith, when honest, looks different for each person. But lies always look the same. As years passed, Morning Star Assembly became a place children dared each other to enter. Bats lived where hymns once rose. Still, elders warned us not to mock it. Respect ruins, they said. They teach lessons. I grew older, my voice deeper, my thoughts heavier. I traveled beyond the town for schooling. There, I learned our story was not unique. Many places had churches that fell, leaders who hid behind holy words, people who feared questioning. This knowledge saddened me, but it also strengthened me. When I returned home during breaks, younger children gathered to hear the tale. I told it carefully, without anger. I explained how silence feeds lies and courage starves them. My father listened from the doorway, pride soft in his eyes. One evening, he told me the hardest part of speaking truth is not the punishment. It is watching people you love choose comfort over honesty. That truth stayed with me more than any sermon. Time softened the town. Trust returned slowly, like grass after fire. People learned to ask questions early, before fear took root. Elders encouraged open talk. When disagreements rose, they were discussed, not buried. Faith became quieter but stronger. No bell rang, yet prayers continued. One dry season, talk began about rebuilding Morning Star Assembly, not as it was, but as something new. Opinions divided the town. Some said the ground was stained. Others said redemption must include rebuilding. My father said buildings matter less than lessons. The debate continued without anger, which itself felt like progress. I realized then that the lie had not won. It had been exposed, studied, and used as warning. That is how communities survive mistakes. Now I sit by the fire, telling this story as it was told to me, shaped by truth, not fear. Children listen, eyes wide. Elders nod, remembering their own silence. Morning Star Assembly may never rise again, but something better replaced it. Awareness, courage, responsibility. Elders say stories live longer than buildings, and lessons travel farther than bells. If only God's name was not used to hide that lie, much pain would have been spared. But because the lie was uncovered, wisdom was born. This is why we speak. This is why we remember. Elders say wisdom does not arrive loudly. It comes like dawn, slow but certain. After the long debates about rebuilding Morning Star Assembly, the town agreed on one thing: whatever rose next must never silence truth again. Meetings were held under the old tree, not inside walls. Everyone spoke, even youths and widows. This alone felt like healing. My father rarely spoke first. He listened, nodding, weighing words like grain. When he finally spoke, people leaned in. He said faith must walk with honesty, or it will limp forever. The people agreed. Instead of rebuilding the church quickly, they chose to wait. They said haste once helped a lie grow. Time, they believed, would protect truth. Meanwhile, life continued. Markets buzzed. Children laughed again. Yet the memory of the fall stayed sharp. Parents warned their children not to follow voices blindly. Teachers encouraged questions. Even prayers changed. People asked God for courage more than protection. I watched these changes with quiet pride. The town was not perfect, but it was awake. One evening, my grandmother told me stories of villages that ignored warnings and repeated their mistakes. The land remembers, she said, but people forget. That night, I promised myself to be a keeper of memory. I understood then that the story of Morning Star Assembly was no longer about a church. It was about choice. Each day, the town chose whether fear or truth would lead. And each day, truth walked a little farther ahead. The next dry season brought visitors from nearby towns. They came with questions after hearing rumors of what happened. Some came curious. Others came wounded by similar stories. Under the tree, our elders listened. They did not defend themselves. They shared openly, speaking of fear, silence, and regret. Visitors were surprised. In many places, such stories were buried. Here, they were told plainly. My father explained how lies grow when protected by holy words. He said faith should never be used to escape accountability. Some visitors cried. Others grew angry at their own towns. But all listened. Soon, word spread that our town was a place where truth was spoken without shouting. This brought respect, but also responsibility. Elders reminded us not to grow proud. Pride, they said, once blinded them. I noticed how carefully leaders now chose words. No one claimed to speak for God alone. Decisions were shared. Mistakes were admitted early. Watching this, I learned leadership is not about control, but care. At night, I wrote down these lessons, afraid time might erase them. My grandmother smiled when she saw me writing. She said stories survive best when carried by many hands. I knew then my role was not only to remember, but to pass on what memory taught. Years rolled forward like a steady drumbeat. I grew into a man, but the boy who first felt the cold behind a false smile never left me. Morning Star Assembly slowly collapsed into stone and dust. Nature reclaimed it without anger. Trees grew where walls once stood. Birds nested where hymns once echoed. People no longer avoided the place. They visited it quietly, reminding children what happens when truth is chained. One day, the town decided not to rebuild anything on that land. They called it a ground of remembrance. No fence, no sign, just open space. During festivals, elders poured libation there, asking for wisdom. Faith and tradition walked side by side again. I realized then that healing does not mean forgetting. It means learning how to carry pain without letting it rule you. My father aged, his hair silver, but his eyes stayed clear. He told me he did not regret speaking out. He only regretted waiting as long as he did. That admission stayed with me. I learned courage delayed still matters, but courage early saves more. One evening, children asked me to tell the story again. I noticed how carefully they listened, how they asked questions without fear. That alone showed how far we had come. I told them truth is not always loud or popular, but it is patient. I told them God's name is powerful and must be handled with clean hands. Elders added their voices, each sharing a lesson learned. The story became richer, not changing facts, but deepening meaning. I understood then that stories grow wiser as they are shared honestly. The lie that once threatened to destroy us had become a teacher, not because it was forgiven, but because it was exposed. That is the power of truth spoken fully. Now, when the fire crackles and night settles, I begin the story the same way every time. I welcome listeners, young and old. I ask them to listen with open hearts. Morning Star Assembly no longer stands, but its lesson walks freely among us. We learn that faith without honesty becomes a weapon. We learn silence can be louder than lies. Most of all, we learn that God's name must never be used to hide wrongdoing. Elders say a village that remembers survives. This is why I speak. This is why you listen. Elders say the end of a story is where its roots grow deepest. As the years continued, our town became known not for the church that fell, but for the lesson it left behind. Travelers who passed through often asked where our great church stood. Elders would point to the open ground and say that is where truth was delayed. Visitors were confused at first, but when the story was told, they understood. Life in the town became simpler. People no longer rushed to place leaders on high stools. Respect was still given, but it was balanced with questions. Parents taught children that obedience without understanding is a trap. At home, my father spent more time teaching than speaking. He told us that lies grow strongest when good people choose comfort over courage. I carried those words into adulthood. Whenever conflict rose in the town, people gathered early to talk. Silence was no longer allowed to stretch for too long. I noticed how fear slowly lost its power when light was invited quickly. The memory of Morning Star Assembly remained strong, but it no longer carried shame alone. It carried wisdom. I realized then that stories do not exist to entertain only. They exist to guard the future. That is why elders repeat them, even when they hurt. A wound remembered is a wound less likely to return. One season, a new preacher passed through the town. He spoke well and drew attention quickly. Some people felt uneasy. Old habits tried to rise again. Instead of whispering, elders invited him to sit under the tree. They asked him questions openly. They listened to his answers carefully. He was surprised but respectful. He admitted he did not have all answers. That honesty pleased the town. He stayed for a short time, taught what he knew, and left without conflict. After he left, elders gathered and thanked one another for choosing wisdom early. I understood then how deeply the lesson had settled. The lie that once ruled through fear had lost its throne. Truth now stood guard. My grandmother, old and bent, smiled as she listened to children question freely. This is how villages survive, she said. Not by avoiding mistakes, but by learning quickly. Her words felt like a blessing. As age touched me, I began traveling farther, carrying the story beyond our town. In other places, people listened with shock, anger, and recognition. Some cried. Others argued. But all remembered. I never spoke with bitterness. I spoke with clarity. I told them how God's name had been used like a shield to protect wrongdoing, and how silence helped the lie grow strong. I told them how truth, once spoken, brought pain before healing. Many thanked me. Some warned me to be careful. I smiled, remembering my father's scars. Courage always carries risk, but silence carries decay. Each time I returned home, I felt grounded again, sitting by the fire, hearing elders add their voices to mine. The story no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to everyone who feared lies wrapped in holy words. Near the end of my father's life, we walked together to the open ground where the church once stood. The sun was setting, painting the sky with calm colors. He stood quietly for a long time. Then he said he was proud, not because he spoke out, but because the town listened eventually. Truth spoken alone is heavy, he said. Truth shared becomes strength. I held his hand, understanding fully for the first time. When he passed, the town mourned him as a man who chose light over comfort. His story joined the larger one, strengthening it. I knew then that this folktale would outlive us all. So now, as the fire burns low and night settles deep, I end this story the way elders taught me. I remind you that faith is powerful, and power must be handled with clean hands. I remind you that God's name is not a hiding place for lies. I remind you that silence can destroy what shouting cannot. If only God's name was not used to hide that lie, much pain would have been spared. But because the lie was uncovered, wisdom was born. Carry this story with care. Tell it when fear returns. Listen when truth knocks. This is how villages survive. THNAKU fear watching polls. Comment what you learnt there at the comment section.